rise. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, this honorable special setting of Superior Court for the County of Wake is now convened and sitting for the regular dispatch of business, the Honorable Judge G. Bryan Collins presiding. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, God save the state and this honorable court. Please be seated and remain quiet. Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sheriff. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bryan Collins. I'm a resident Superior Court judge here in Wake County. It is my great honor to be here today to preside over this special session of the Wake County Superior Court, where we will honor and celebrate the memories of our friends. And I especially want to welcome those of you who don't come to court very often. I know that there were times in your loved ones' lives when they probably spent more time with us than they did with you. So thank you for letting us have them during the time that you did. I will now turn this hearing over, or this session over, to past president of the Wake County Bar and the 10th Judicial District Bar, Ashely Campbell.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashely Campbell. I'm standing in today for our 10th Judicial District Bar President, Nancy Grace, and I'm so thrilled to be here with you. When I was president, memorial sessions of court were my very favorite thing to attend. On behalf of the 5,500 members of the 10th Judicial District, we are thrilled that all of you are here. This is a special time that we take every year to celebrate the lives of those who have meant so much to us personally and to our profession. The Professionalism Committee this year has as its theme, What Will Be My Story? And the theme is meant to have us reflect on how people will talk about us when we're gone. It means it's so much more than our resume virtues. It's really about how did we impact people, how did we impact the clients we served, our families, and our colleagues. And I hope that as all of you listen to these 6 wonderful speakers today, talk about these 6 wonderful lawyers, that you'll reflect on how we will all be remembered and leave today inspired by what you hear. I would like to take a moment to thank the Memorials Committee, who has done such a wonderful job organizing this session of court. Thank you, Your Honor, for being here today, and for the chair of the committee, Bryan Reuben.
Good afternoon. My name is Bryan Dorton. I'm the chair of the Memorials Committee here in the 10th Judicial District, and I want to welcome you all to a very meaningful and special thing that we do here in Wake County. I truly believe that these special sessions are integral to the fabric of our bar. I always walk away from these sessions feeling inspired by the stories that I hear and the lives that we have all experienced. I want to express our sincere thanks to the families of our honorees for allowing us to recognize your loved ones in this way. And for those who have previously attended these sessions, my words will sound familiar, but I do believe they bear repeating. Today we gather not to mourn, but to remember 6 important members of our legal community, to honor their contributions to our profession, perhaps to even share a laugh with a funny memory or learn something new about an individual that we've known for quite some time. And most importantly, to reflect upon and be inspired by the story that was their lives and the impact that these individuals had, not only on our professional lives, but our personal lives as well. And with that, our first honoree is J. Allan Adams. And Mr. Adams will be presented by Bruce Thompson.
Al Adams loved life. Al had an absolute passion about life. He had a love of sailing and of his family's vacation home on Emerald Isle. He would often regale us with tales of his adventures, but probably better described as misadventures on the open sea. And one of his many sailboats, which every time he bought a new sailboat, he christened it the boat Democratic. Al had a passion for the arts, especially opera. He was a season ticket holder at the Metropolitan Opera in New York, but was a great supporter of the Opera Company of North Carolina, which later became the North Carolina Opera. In fact, in 2008, they showed their appreciation for his support by asking him to appear as the cook in the first act of Madame Butterfly. although they did not let him sing. Al did tell us later that when he was on stage, he wept tears of joy just being on the stage with those great performers and what that meant to his heart and to his soul. As the chairman of the Wake County Public Libraries Board, Al presided over the merger of the white and African American libraries to form today's Wake County Public Library System. He was a founding member and chair of the S.C. Hall Foundation at Shaw University, where he helped to preserve the nation's first historic structure built for African American women. He was instrumental in founding the Arts Advocates of North Carolina, the Clarence Leitner Youth Leadership Endowment, and the Martin Luther King Resource Center. He chaired the USS North Carolina Battleship Commission and served on the boards of the North Carolina Symphony, the Raleigh City Museum, the North Carolina Child Advocacy, the Opera Company, Wake Tech, and the Raleigh Civil Services Commission. He would be very angry at me if I didn't mention this next part. Al was a longtime advocate for his alma mater, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He served as chair of the Board of Visitors and a member of the General Alumni Association. Al loved Betty Adams. Above everything else, Betty was Al's true love. My Betty, that's what he called her, if it was on the floor of the legislature or the hallways of our office. Every time he uttered her name, his eyes twinkled and a great smile came across his face. He admired every single thing about her. Without exception, if you showed up at Al and Betty's Cameron Park home at 5 o'clock, they would welcome you with open arms and a fresh martini. Cocktail hour at their home was revered because it was an opportunity to enjoy fellowship, to enjoy laughter, and sometimes even share tears. And even if nobody showed up, Al and Betty still went about at the appointed hour, had their own cocktail party, and they basked in the glow of their love for each other. I could never grow tired of hearing Al talk about the first time that he saw Betty. He fell in love with her at that very moment and never stopped loving her. It makes me so happy to know that they are together again, preparing for Heaven's cocktail hour this evening. You all know that Al loved politics. He believed in the political system and the good that it could do for our citizens. He didn't love the current state of politics and the decline of meaningful communications between opposing sides. He refused to participate in discord and blame. I don't think there was a cynical bone in Al's body. You all know that he served as an officer in the United States Navy. I think he saw his political career as an extension of that public service. He never saw someone opposing him on a political issue as his enemy. Quite the opposite. He embraced them as a friend and tried to find common ground on which to move forward. Al was certainly one of the finest progressive political leaders in North Carolina history. He was a 5-term member of the State House of Representatives who fought for public education. In fact, his advocacy for education laid the groundwork for North Carolina's educational achievements in the 80s and the 90s. He championed increases in funding to the North Carolina Arts Council that supported both major public installations and local grassroots organizations. One of the achievements that I think he was the most proud of was his sponsorship of the legislation that created the public beach access in North Carolina. The ocean always restored Al's mind, body, and spirit, and he wanted everyone else to enjoy that treasure, and he made it happen. When you would walk down the hallway to Al's office, there were many pictures and awards and accolades, but the thing that he was the most proud of was an old rusty sign, probably one of the first public beach access signs in North Carolina that he had hanging proudly on his wall. So whenever I'm lugging our tent, our chairs, our beach towels through the sand, I stop and look at that sign and smile and appreciate what Al did for all of us. Al was consistently rated as one of the most effective legislators and later as one of the state's most influential lobbyists. He always loved to brag that when the Republicans took over the state house in 1994, his lobbyist ranking actually went up. But that's no surprise to any of us because everyone at the legislature, be they Republicans, Democrats, or independents, they all trusted, respected, and admired Al. He was one of the first lawyer lobbyists to take on pro bono clients as a part of that practice. He helped secure funds for the North Carolina Museum of History and other cultural cornerstones of our state. He did all this without charge because he believed in utilizing our profession to do good. The North Carolina Community Action Association recognized his pro bono work for underrepresented citizens with their prestigious Gloria Williams Award. Politics today sure could use more citizens like Al Adams. And then finally, Al Adams loved the law. Catherine Airwood sent me a speech that Al gave to the Wake County Bar Association, where he started it by saying, "I was blessed to start my legal career with the Raleigh firm of Young, Moore, and Henderson. Charles Young, Joe Moore, and B.T. Henderson taught me professionalism in the highest form, and their examples and teaching are still a part of me this very day, some 50 years later." Al lived that. He believed in mentorship. He sought to provide advice and guidance to the younger attorneys in our firm. As a young attorney himself, he served on the board of the Wake County Bar Association and also the North Carolina Bar Association. During the 1960s, Al advocated for the integration of the Wake County Bar Association. It took many years to get a vote and to get that passed, but I'm proud to say that the Wake County Bar Association integrated before the State Bar Association. He was a partner in Sanford, Adams, McCullough, and Beard, one of the first firms in Raleigh to hire African American and female lawyers. Al led the efforts to merge that firm with a Charlotte firm to create our Parker Poe, Adams, and Bernstein. As a member of our management committee, he made sure that we remained true to the core principles of our profession. In that same speech to the Bar Association, Al reminded us that this association is grounded in the ethics and integrity of its members. We believe and hold fast to our creed of professionalism, which in part states, as lawyers, we are guardians for our legal system, and we have an important professional responsibility to recognize, honor, and enhance the rule of law. We are in a privileged position, and therefore we work under special obligations. To forget or set aside these obligations is to dishonor our profession. Al's abilities, passions, and sustained commitment enriched cultural and educational resources, advanced social justice, made Raleigh and Wake County a better place to live. His good works will continue to improve the lives of North Carolinians for generations to come. For many of us in the courtroom today, Al was our mentor, he was our colleague, but above all else and most important, he was our friend. We still love him and miss him every day, but we're so thankful for his contributions to our lives. God bless you, Al.
I'm honored today to speak in remembrance of Reuben Clark. I had the privilege of, he's my good friend and colleague for a long time. I had the privilege of practicing law with Reuben at Maupin Taylor and then Williams Mullen for almost 30 years. We were both commercial real estate lawyers. Reuben was extremely smart and legendarily hardworking. If I ever went in on a weekend or at night, which was not all that often, frankly, Reuben was sure to be there. He was completely immersed in what he was doing, and the more complex and bigger the deal, the happier Reuben was. Reuben, if he smelled a rat in his case, he was relentless in getting to the bottom of it and ferreting out that rat. He left no stones unturned. Reuben also had something of a social justice streak in him. He went to law school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and while he was there, he was a VISTA volunteer in Philadelphia, and his first job at a law school was with the Regional Housing Legal Services in Philadelphia, where he focused on developing low-income housing. For most of his career, Reuben was active with the board of the Friends of the Legal Resources Center of South Africa, which is the largest public interest law firm in South Africa. And the Friends, the Friends of the Legal Resources Center of South Africa is an American organization that raises money and helps the Legal Resources Center of South Africa in any way that they can. And for a while, Reuben was the president of that board, and he made numerous trips to South Africa to further that endeavor. Reuben was also on the board for quite a while of the Triangle chapter of the Red Cross, and he worked on numerous real property issues for Edenton Street Methodist Church. Reuben was a big guy with a big presence. You always knew when he was around, and he had a big booming voice. It was a treat to sit in front of him in church over at Edenton Street, where you could hear him belting out those hymns. Reuben absolutely adored his children, Catherine and Ben, and his granddaughter, Kennedy, and his daughter-in-law, Morgan. And in the last few years of Reuben's life, when he was limited by the health issues he had, I could, based on my conversations with him, I knew that was what was keeping him sustained. That was really what was keeping him going, and what was without them, Reuben would have been lost over those few years, I think. I'm glad today to remember Reuben Clark, my dear friend and my longtime colleague. Thanks.
Our next honoree is Allan Head, and Allan will be presented by Melissa Essary.
His picture, I could close right now. When Allan's wife, Patty, called to ask if I could give a brief eulogy on Allan's behalf, I was deeply honored. That honor quickly turned to anxiety. What could I say that hasn't been said? But I'll tell you that anxiety turned back to honor and a sense of gratitude, and yes, to Allan, a debt that can never be repaid. So today I speak with passion about my friend who embraced so many of us in this room and loved us so well. I knew him for only 11 short years, and many of you in this room knew him decades longer. Patty, I share this podium with you because you knew and loved him so well for more than 50 years. And today we honor not only Allan, but his beautiful wife, Patty. Thank you. I met Allan just before, literally a week before, I became Dean of Campbell Law School back in 2006 at the Bar Association meeting that year that was being held at the beach. He didn't know me. I didn't know him, but he greeted me as though I were a long-lost friend. He had this warm, friendly way about him. The beach music was blaring that last night, and I well remember Allan coming over. I was sitting down, a little mystified by how much fun everybody was having, and he said, "Do you want a shag?" And y'all, we don't use that word in Texas. My eyes got wide, and I thought, my, oh my, or maybe there is a foreign language being spoken in North Carolina. So I took a risk that it was the latter, and we got up and jitterbugged until my sides were splitting with laughter. I remember that. I remember where we were. You know, those iconic moments in your life where you meet someone and you have that memory that just, it's there forever. And that jitterbugging, frankly, I can still feel it. I can see where we were. It is absolutely emblazoned on my mind. That was the beginning of a beautiful friendship that we shared. I shared this friendship with a man who embodied, honestly, so much that is good about our world. Passion, warmth, kindness, and humor, all while leading and building over 43 years' time, one of the best state bar associations in the country, advancing the legal profession, loving the law as he did, and knowing that those of us who are lawyers needed to be educated, needed to have fellowship and community with one another, and he was just great at what he did. We miss him so much. And he did this all the while being a husband of more than 50 years to Patty, being a father to 3 years. I got to sit at the table with him when he was honored as Father of the Year. Patty, I don't remember what year that was, but it was such a privilege. And I know he was a great father, a great grandfather who still skied, zip-lined, and more. And y'all know this is true. He was just a cool guy, right? That was Allan. If you knew Allan, you knew the twinkle in his eye, you knew the laughter around the corner, and you knew the friendship that is a footprint on all our hearts. For an Allan, life was to be lived, people were to be embraced, and his buoyant enthusiasm, buoyant was a word that came to mind when I thought about this. Buoyant. For life and laughter was contagious, and it really lifted everybody in the room with him. Y'all know what I'm talking about if you knew Allan. It was that embrace. So in preparing for this eulogy, I actually watched an hour-long memorial tribute to Allan that was composed of pictures, just a soundtrack and pictures. And this was Allan in most of the pictures, holding people, embracing. Those arms were just open to people, to life, to love. And I watched the whole thing. I was mesmerized because it was just Allan. Those pictures are a legacy to the man with the open arms. His can-do attitude infected me as a dean in my leadership role at Campbell Law School. All of a sudden, I found myself in a state, North Carolina, that welcomed deans and interested lawyers to a table that met regularly called the Law School Liaison Committee. And I thought, what is that? And until I experienced it, I couldn't believe it, because in Texas, law schools, frankly, are silos and competitors. But the Law School Liaison Committee, an Allan idea, brought together law school deans, representatives of law schools, and members of the legal community for us to share with each other what we were doing at our respective law schools. And instead of enmity, there was support and sharing. There was this idea that as law schools, as the educators of future lawyers, Margaret Curran, I'm guessing you're still on the Law School Liaison Committee, we should be a rising tide that lifts all boats. And we were. And for him, for the 6 years I was dean and part of that committee, I give him thanks. And yes, I learned secrets from other schools in that committee as well. We copied a few things in clinics, and we learned from each other. Allan wanted the best for every law student in the state, and he shepherded more than a few of them to law school, through law school, and into the profession. I met Madison Sides. Madison, if you'll just wave your hand, she's sitting by Patty. She's a 1L. 1 week away from finishing up her first year at Campbell Law School, and Allan was her protege. And I remembered this, I'll get a little emotional, only as I was sitting on the bench a moment ago, that the last time I saw Allan was when he was frail, but when he had brought Madison to my office at Campbell Law School when she was looking at law schools. Madison, I didn't realize it until a few moments ago, but that was the last time I saw Allan, and even then, in the last days, he was doing for others, and he was interested that you find the right home for you. And that is a precious memory to me, and it speaks volumes about who he was. And you're a legacy of his as you live on to become, and it'll take a little more work and a little more time to become a great lawyer, but meaningful to me. So as I close, I simply throw out these words: family, faith, friends. Allan Hood was so much to so many. To me, he was a true friend, whose broad smile and broad embrace are seared in my heart. Rest well, dear friend, and keep on jitterbugging with the angels.
I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you this afternoon. Unlike the other people you've heard about today, my husband was an attorney here in North Carolina, but did not practice here. However, he was always very proud of being an attorney, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity to share with all of you a few things about his life. My husband was a very intelligent man and had a rich set of interests and experiences throughout the course of his career, starting in the state of Iowa. We're both from the Midwest. So he started as an electrical engineer and worked for John Deere, moved into finance where he secured his CPA and where he functioned as the chief financial officer for a division of a manufacturing company in the Midwest. Moved into a CIO or Chief Information Officer for the same manufacturing company, and finished his career here in the state of North Carolina working for the state treasurer's office, where he leveraged almost all of those skills and functionalities and a good job around accounting and law. He did spend some time, obviously, as a lawyer as well in the early days in Iowa. He was a lawyer with several other young men in an office in a small town where they pretty much covered the gamut of everything from a legal perspective that you'd need in a small town. So wills and marriage disputes and divorces and real estate and just about everything that you could cover. Given his skills and expertise in the financial area, he seemed to gravitate to the really fun aspects like identifying and locating hidden financial assets that would be up for debate as a part of some of the divorce proceedings. So depending on which side of the room you were on with him, you were either very glad of his financial expertise or dismayed by his financial expertise. But he made many contributions for his clients there in terms of securing what he felt were the fair and the best settlements, if you will, for him. So his experiences in law were one of the things that I wanted to share with you today. The second thing I wanted to mention was really his ongoing, I'm going to say just joy and intellectual curiosity about the law. And I think a best way to represent this was about a year after we moved to North Carolina, I was at work at IBM, and he called me and said, those routine heart tests didn't turn out to be so routine. And he said, they're not letting me leave the hospital, and in 2 days I'm going to have open heart surgery. And then he proceeded to say, but what I'm really worried about is whether I'm going to recover soon enough to take the bar, the patent bar exam here at the end of the month. So we had a little discussion about time management and prioritization. But I'm pleased to say that he succeeded and passed through both of those events successfully. But to me, that demonstrates my husband's tenacity and his persistence and really his lifelong engagement and intellectual curiosity about the law. Even as he moved into other pursuits here in our lives in North Carolina, he was always committed to continuing his education, challenging himself with tests online, and was an active participant in the Wake County bar meetings and subject matter presentations there that he enjoyed so much. The third area that I wanted to mention that really was a contribution that the legal industry brought to both John and myself was really more in the social area. So he was an avid participant here at the Wake County bar meetings, tried not to miss any of the social events, would come home and tell me about the really exciting things he had learned in tax law. I guess that was a matter of personal interpretation, but the event that we both really enjoyed the most was the annual Christmas party in early December every year. My husband was a good musician. He loved to dance, and we both really made it a priority to take advantage of that event. We didn't know a lot of people since John was not practicing law here, but the food was delicious, the company engaging, and the dancing wonderful. So we would typically whirl our way around the dance floor through hours of the event, where we too learned how to shag, coming here as transplants from the Midwest. But I guess what I wanted to say here in summary was to really recognize and acknowledge my husband's contribution to his clients, even in the small town of Iowa where he practiced for several years. And I also wanted to acknowledge really the contributions of the legal industry to John, both in his ongoing intellectual pursuits and engagement and skills enhancement, something that he loved throughout his years, as well as the enriching social life and experiences that the law provided to both of us. He was very proud to be an attorney. I think he made contributions to the legal industry in Iowa and to his clients. And more importantly, I felt that the legal industry made contributions to both of us. And I wanted to take this advantage of this opportunity to share that with you today. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jack Jenkins. I'm a retired judge. If I seem a little nervous, I'm not used to being on this side of the bench. But and please, may it please the court. It's nice talking to y'all. No, I'm here to talk about Mark Lodge, and Mark was my brother-in-law for some 44 years. Mark met my sister Suzanne, who was seated on the second row there, in early 1974. And within 6 months, they were married, and they stayed happily married until Mark passed away last year. There are many words I could use to describe Mark. Integrity comes to mind immediately, also intelligence. And I want to talk about Mark's intelligence a little bit more in just a minute. But he truly was a Southern gentleman and a Renaissance man. And in fact, he was the kind of person that you would want your son or daughter to be. Now, I want to briefly go over his resume, and I got to warn you ahead of time, it's very impressive. It's the kind of resume that makes average people like me a little bit angry almost. It's so perfect. But he graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Virginia. He was an Eccles Scholar there, and as I understand it, an Eccles Scholarship is similar to our Moorhead Scholarship. And oh, by the way, he also was the captain of the track team. He went to law school at UVA, where he finished in the top 10% of his class, was a member of the Order of the Coif, and was executive editor of the Law Review. Mark also proudly served in the United States Navy, and he was chief operations officer on board the USS Byrd and then later the USS Ricketts. Both of those were guided missile destroyers, and as I understand it, a COO is basically third in command on those ships. Mark also was a professor. And he wasn't a professor anywhere, just any college. He was a professor at Cornell. Mark also was a businessman, and he worked in the computer industry, the software industry, primarily consulting law firms in New York and also Washington, D.C., as well as here in Raleigh. Mark also was an author, and his legal thriller Within the Bounds was published by G.P. Putnam and Sons, received national distribution. He also wrote various articles and op-ed pieces and short stories for periodicals around the country, including the Alfred Hitchcock magazine. And finally, Mark was a lawyer. He began his career at King & Spalding in Atlanta, which, as you know, is one of the preeminent firms in the country, and eventually made his way here to North Carolina, where he became general counsel of the old Department of Human Resources, and I believe it's called DHHS now. From there, he went to the Attorney General's office, where he served with distinction for many years. And in fact, it was this state government service that Mark had that prompted the Honorable Roy Cooper to bestow on Mark the Order of the Longleaf Pine, which, as you know, is the highest civilian honor recognized in the state of North Carolina. Now, that paints a pretty impressive picture, but there's more to Mark than just that. As I said, he was a devoted husband to my sister Suzanne, and theirs was a very loving and happy marriage indeed. He also was a wonderful father, and together Suzanne and Mark raised two spectacularly outstanding kids. Their oldest, Robert, who could not be here today. Poor fella has to be in Hawaii. But Robert was a UVA graduate, and he is a senior executive with an Australian software firm. He actually works out of San Francisco. And their daughter Elizabeth, another UVA graduate who's here today, lives in Austin, Texas. Elizabeth is a producer, and her movie Monsters and Men was released last year and actually won accolades at the Sundance Film Festival. Very impressive family indeed, and of course, it would be the week that UVA wins the national championship. And we've got Mark and Elizabeth and Robert, and they're all celebrating all week. But anyway, be that as it may, I'm not as big a UVA fan as they are probably. But anyway, I want to return to Mark's intelligence, so I'll talk about that just briefly. We had lunch earlier at the family as a large contingent here, and among other things, we were talking about Trivial Pursuit. And I'll never forget playing Trivial Pursuit with Mark. And quite frankly, to say that I was playing or that anybody else at that table was playing is really not true. Mark was playing, and we were sitting there with a little card asking questions. And, you know, it wasn't unusual for him to get 10, 15, 20 questions in a row right. And it wasn't just the fact that he was answering all the questions. It was the way he answered them. I mean, for instance, it'd be some generic thing like rock climbing, but he'd know the technical name for it. And we'd kind of look at the card and say, Mark, I'm not sure if you're right or not. Could you be less specific? And don't even get me started on Jeopardy. I don't even want to go there with him because it'd just make you angry almost watching that show with him. I met Mark when I was a junior in high school, and it was pretty apparent to me up front that this was the kind of person that could be an excellent resource. And I relied on Mark pretty heavily in high school and college and then law school. But when I became a lawyer and then a judge, I really relied on him. And some strange question or issue would come up, and I'd bounce it off of Mark. And invariably, he'd know the answer, give good advice, good counsel. And on those rare occasions, and it was rare, that he was stumped, a conversation with him, we'd go our separate ways, and 2 or 3 hours later, I'd get a call back. Jack, you remember that question you had earlier? Well, let me talk about it. I got some input, some feedback for you. And basically what he would do on his own volition was go research it. And researching the Mark wasn't just glancing at the internet. He might start there, and the internet would refer to some magazine or some book or whatever. He'd actually go get the book and read it, read the part in the book that he needed to read, or the magazine article. He'd bounce it off of resources that he had, and when he came back with the answer, it was the kind of thing that you definitely, it was thoroughly vetted. You could take it to the bank. Quite literally, in my case, he was a lawyer's lawyer, and I suspect he may have been a lawyer's lawyer to some of you in this room today. I said at the outset that Mark was the kind of person that you'd want your kid to be. Let me take that a step further. He really was the kind of person that you would want your lawyer to be. Thank you.
Your Honor, members of the bar, family, friends, and Pat Spearman, who just came in. Pat, great to have you here for this event. It's an honor to speak on behalf of Bob Spearman. As most of you know, Bob grew up in Chapel Hill, went to Carolina as a Moorhead Scholar, went on to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, then Yale Law School, clerked with Justice Hugo Black of the United States Supreme Court and Justice Black last term, including working on the Pentagon Papers case in 1971. With that background, as you can imagine, Bob could have practiced law about anywhere, and he chose to come back to his home, North Carolina, to practice here in Raleigh, the state capital. Bob joined what he would call the Sanford firm, and Bob was always so proud of his law partners at the start as well as now. Those involved Terry Sanford, Hugh Cannon, Al Adams, Bill McCullough, John Beard, Ed Gaskins, who's with us today, Hugh Stevens, and others. He always enjoyed and loved those partners, and his relationships with them were very, very important to him. At the start of his career, Bob was not only getting his career going, but he was building a law firm. And in 1974, he led the effort, although others were involved, Ed and the others, in hiring Dan Blue to the firm. I came in 75, Nancy Essex in 76, Catherine Erwood in 77, Rich Leonard in 78, Bill Pappas in 1979, and then Cindy Whitner and Renee Montgomery. That list may not sound remarkable today. It was then, because North Carolina law firms did not hire women in those days. And I think Bob and Ed and the others weren't so much trying to change the world or make a statement. They were just trying to find the best lawyers they could. And they found lawyers, including 4 women of those first 8, which really have had great careers here in Wake County. Bob was a litigator at heart and soul. He liked the competition and the strategy of it. And I'll tell you one brief story. It involves a lawyer here in town who came to see Bob. And the lawyer said he had a client, had an insurance coverage dispute, and there was a big claim, and the client really needed the coverage. So that lawyer had filed a declaratory judgment action, and the trial court ruled in favor of coverage. So that was good. Unfortunately, the Court of Appeals ruled there was no coverage, reversed, and then on a petition for review, the Supreme Court declined to take the case. So the day after getting that notice from the Supreme Court, this lawyer came to see Bob and says, what do we do? Well, that was a good question. So Bob, as he always did, and I think he learned this from Justice Black, pulled out the rule book, the North Carolina Appellate Rules, and started reading about, well, what might they do? So after a while, Bob said, well, let's try a petition to reconsider denial of discretionary review. And of course, the rules don't provide for that, although they don't really say you can't do it. So Bob got a couple of his friends on the UNC faculty at the law school to sign the certificate saying the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals opinion was incorrect, and filed it. And sure enough, a few weeks later, the Supreme Court granted the petition for reconsideration and allowed discretionary review. So another day or two later, the lawyer comes back and says, Bob, that's great. How about drafting the brief? So sure enough, Bob drafted the brief before the Supreme Court. That was filed, and a few months later, the Supreme Court reversed the Court of Appeals and found there was coverage. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of us should go out trying to file those kind of petitions for review, denial of discretionary review, but it worked for Bob, and it showed a kind of his willingness to work with the rules and make something happen for a client who really needed some help. Bob litigated all kinds of cases. They're legendary around the firm, the CF Industries Transco case, J.C. Penney, Baxter Travenol. The one, though, that of course he is known for is Leandro versus State of North Carolina. This is the case that established the right, even for low-income North Carolina students, to a sound basic education. In working on this case, which was filed in the mid-90s, Bob really enjoyed working with some other colleagues, Larry Armstrong from Halifax County, and also Jerry Hancock, who's with us today. Jerry and Bob were fast friends for years, and one of the highlights of Bob's life was working with Jerry on that case. In our firm, there were lots of others. Rob Tiller was involved, Melanie Dubas, who's here, Scott Basil. They were very active, as were others. On the staff side, Janeda Sims, his longtime secretary, worked on the case, as did Kathy Thompson and others. But one of the highlights of his career was working on that case. He worked on it until he retired. And indeed, our firm is still working on it because that right to a sound basic education is not yet fully funded, although it will be before long, we hope. Bob was an outstanding intellect. He was a fine friend to so many of us. He helped us with our careers and lit up our lives. We're proud to have known and worked with Bob. Thank you, Your Honor.
That concludes today's program. Thank you to all of our presenters for your thoughtful words and sharing your memories. I want to thank the Memorials Committee and the members of the committee for their continued exceptional work in putting these special sessions together. Many thanks to our videographer, Brian Miller, of Frontrunner Productions, Charlotte Sharp and Whitney Von Ham of the 10th Judicial District and Wake County Bar. Thank you, Your Honor, for presiding over this special session. Clerk Williams and his staff, Mr. Bailiff, and of course to all of you for coming here and joining us today for this very special occasion. Judge Collins.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for your continued outstanding leadership of this committee. It's really one of the more important committees of the 10th Judicial District Bar. I always learn something new. I learned a lot new today that I didn't know. It's a good time to sit and think about where we've been and where we're going, and I'm honored to have all the family members here. All of our court family is just really touched by this moment, and it's an important time for us to do. So the court system's very happy that you ask us to do this and that everybody comes. And we've been doing it for a long, long time. Unfortunately, we have to do it more and more often because we're getting so big. But anyway, thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Sheriff, would you please adjourn this special ceremonial session of the Wake County Superior Court, sine die.
Sir, all rise. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. This honorable special setting of Superior Court for the County of Wake is now adjourned, sine die. God save the state and this honorable court.